My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel of my beat-up Honda Civic, staring at the imposing iron gates of Willowbrook Cemetery in Greenwich, Connecticut. The October rain drummed against my windshield, matching the rhythm of my anxious heartbeat. I hadn't been back to this wealthy suburb since Christmas 3 years ago, when my stepmother Margaret made it crystal clear I wasn't welcome at their holiday gatherings anymore. Now Dad was gone, and I had to face them all again. I pulled into the parking lot, my car looking pathetic next to the sea of luxury vehicles: Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas, the kind of cars I could never afford on my freelance graphic design income. I lived in a studio apartment in Hartford, barely making rent most months, while my half-siblings lived in their Manhattan penthouses and Hampton summer homes. The funeral home was packed. Dad had been a successful real estate developer, and it seemed like half of Connecticut's elite had shown up to pay their respects. I slipped in through the back, hoping to avoid the family receiving line, but my luck ran out immediately. Well, look what the cat dragged in. The voice belonged to my half-brother James, 32 and everything Dad had wanted in a son. Tall, polished, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. He stood with his wife Patricia, both of them looking at me like I was something unpleasant they'd stepped in. "Hello, James." I smoothed down my black dress, the only formal thing I owned, purchased at a thrift store for a job interview 2 years ago. "I'm sorry for your loss," he snorted. "Your loss? Dad barely spoke to you. When's the last time you even called him?" The words hit harder than I expected because they were partially true. Dad and I had grown distant after he remarried when I was 15. Margaret had made sure of that, slowly poisoning him against me with stories about my rebellious attitude and lack of ambition. By the time I graduated college with a fine arts degree instead of the business degree he'd wanted, our relationship was hanging by a thread. "I loved him too," I whispered. But James was already walking away. The service was beautiful in that cold, formal way that rich people preferred. The pastor spoke about Dad's business achievements, his charitable contributions, his devotion to his family. I noticed he didn't mention me once. Margaret sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, flanked by James and my half-sister Catherine. I sat in the back, alone. During the eulogy, Catherine spoke about what a wonderful father Dad had been, how he'd supported all their dreams. She talked about the family vacations to Europe, the graduation parties, the business advice. I remembered begging Dad to come to my college art show. He'd sent his assistant with a generic congratulations card instead. After the burial, everyone gathered at the Fairfield Country Club for the reception. I almost left, but something kept me there. Maybe it was the need for closure, or maybe I was just a glutton for punishment. The whispers started immediately. I could hear fragments of conversations as I moved through the crowd, trying to stay invisible. Poor Richard, having to deal with that disappointment. I heard she's some kind of starving artist. Margaret tried so hard to include her, but you know how some children are. I was reaching for a glass of water when Margaret appeared beside me, resplendent in her black Chanel suit. At 55, she was still beautiful in that preserved, untouchable way that money could buy. "Nicole." She never called me Nick, the name Dad had given me when I was little. "I'm surprised you came. He was my father, too." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your father was disappointed in you for years. The least you could do is show some respect and not make this about yourself." The room seemed to quiet around us, though I knew that was probably my imagination. Still, I felt eyes on us, waiting to see what would happen. "I'm not making this about anything," I said quietly. "I just came to say goodbye." "Good. Then you can leave. You've said it." Margaret's voice carried just enough to reach nearby ears. "We all know you're only here hoping for something. Well, don't get your hopes up. Richard took care of the people who actually mattered to him." The humiliation burned in my chest. A few people actually chuckled, including James's wife Patricia. I wanted to disappear, to run back to my car and drive away from this place forever. But my feet seemed rooted to the expensive carpet. "Mom's right," Catherine chimed in, appearing with her husband beside her. "Dad was pretty clear about how he felt about your choices, Nick. Maybe it's time you accepted that and moved on with your life." The laughter was louder now. Not cruel, exactly, but dismissive. The kind of laughter that said they all agreed with Margaret's assessment, that I was the family failure, the black sheep who'd never amounted to anything. I stood there, frozen, as 20 years of feeling like an outsider in my own family crashed over me. All the missed dinners because Margaret forgot to invite me, all the family photos I wasn't in, all the times Dad chose his new family over his first daughter. Just when I thought I couldn't take another second, a deep voice cut through the murmur of conversation. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Nicole Harrison." Everyone turned toward the voice. A distinguished older man in an expensive gray suit was scanning the crowd. He had silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and he carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen many important meetings. "That's me," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. He walked over, extending his hand. "Ms. Harrison, I'm Robert Chen, your father's attorney. I've been looking for you. We need to talk about your father's will." The room went completely silent. Margaret's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping forward, "but there must be some mistake. Richard's will was already read yesterday. The immediate family was present." Mr. Chen looked at her with professional politeness. "Mrs. Harrison, yesterday's reading was for the preliminary assets. There are additional matters that specifically concern Ms. Nicole Harrison that need to be addressed separately." James pushed forward. His face flushed. "What kind of additional matters? Dad told us everything was settled. The business, the house, everything goes to Mom and us kids." "Some things, yes," Mr. Chen replied calmly. "But not everything. Ms. Harrison, could we speak privately? Perhaps there's an office we could use?" Margaret looked like she was about to object, but the club manager quickly offered his office. As Mr. Chen and I walked away, I could hear the explosion of whispered conversations behind us. My mind was reeling. Dad had left me something? After years of feeling like he'd written me off completely, he'd remembered me in his will? I couldn't process it. Part of me wondered if this was some kind of mistake, or worse, some final humiliation Margaret had orchestrated to embarrass me one last time. The manager's office was small but elegant, with dark wood paneling and books lining the walls. Mr. Chen gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from the desk, then took the seat opposite me. "Ms. Harrison, first let me say how sorry I am for your loss. Your father spoke of you often. That surprised me." "He did?" "Oh yes, more than you might think." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Before we get to the legal matters, he asked me to give you this." He handed me an envelope with my name written in Dad's familiar handwriting. My hands were shaking as I opened it. "My dear Nick," it began, and I could hear his voice in my head. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably feeling pretty confused right now. I know we haven't been close these past few years, and I take full responsibility for that. I let other people influence me when I should have trusted my own heart. You were always my little girl, my creative, independent, beautiful daughter, and I failed you. I'm hoping this letter and what Mr. Chen is about to tell you will help make up for some of that. I love you, and I'm proud of who you've become, even if I never told you that when I had the chance. Your loving father, Richard." Tears were streaming down my face by the time I finished reading. Mr. Chen quietly handed me a tissue. "Take your time," he said gently. When I could speak again, I asked, "What did he leave me?" Mr. Chen smiled. "Everything." I stared at Mr. Chen, certain I'd misheard him. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Your father left you everything, Ms. Harrison. The house, the business, the investment portfolio, the vacation properties, all of it." The room started spinning. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to process what he was telling me. "But yesterday, Margaret said the will was already read, that everything went to her and my half-siblings." Mr. Chen's expression grew somber. "That was a preliminary reading of an older will, one your father had drafted 5 years ago. However, 3 months ago, your father came to see me. He wanted to make significant changes. The document we read yesterday is no longer valid." 3 months ago? My mind raced. That was around the time Dad had called me out of the blue. I'd been so busy with a freelance project that I'd barely talked to him for 10 minutes. Had he been trying to tell me something? "Your father was very specific about his wishes," Mr. Chen continued, pulling out a thick document. "This is his final will and testament, signed and witnessed properly. In it, he states that he wants to correct what he called years of poor judgment regarding his estate planning." He began reading in his calm, professional voice. "To my daughter Nicole Margaret Harrison, whom I have failed as a father, but who has never failed to be exactly who she was meant to be, I leave my entire estate. This includes the family home at 47 Maple Ridge Drive in Greenwich, Harrison Development Company and all its assets, the vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, the portfolio of investment properties, and all bank accounts, stocks, and bonds currently held in my name." I couldn't breathe. The numbers Mr. Chen was reciting were astronomical. The business alone was worth over $50 million. The house was valued at $8 million. The investment portfolio... I stopped listening because it was too much to comprehend. "However," Mr. Chen continued, "your father also included specific provisions for your stepmother and half-siblings. Margaret will receive a lump sum of $2 million and the right to remain in the Greenwich house for up to 1 year while she makes other arrangements. James and Catherine will each receive $1 million. That's still incredibly generous," I whispered. "Your father thought so too. He also left detailed instructions for you regarding the management of Harrison Development Company. He knew you didn't have business experience, so he's arranged for the current management team to continue running day-to-day operations while you learn the ropes. If you choose to sell the company, he's identified potential buyers who would maintain the current employees' positions. A knock on the door interrupted us. The club manager peeked in. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but Mrs. Harrison is asking how much longer you'll need the office. The family is quite anxious." Mr. Chen looked at me. "Are you ready to face them?" I thought about the laughter, the dismissive comments, the years of being treated like an unwanted outsider. Do I have to tell them everything today? The will becomes public record within a few days regardless, but you can choose how and when to share the details. I stood up, my legs still unsteady. Let's get this over with. We walked back to the main reception area, where Margaret, James, and Catherine were waiting with several other family members and close friends. The moment we appeared, Margaret rushed over. "Well, what was this all about? Some small remembrance? A piece of jewelry, perhaps?" Mr. Chen cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harrison, if I could have everyone's attention, please. I need to make an announcement regarding Mr. Harrison's final will and testament." The room quieted again. James and Catherine moved closer to their mother, protective and curious. I stayed near the back, still trying to process everything. As some of you know, there was a preliminary reading of Mr. Harrison's will yesterday. However, I must inform you that the document read yesterday has been superseded by a more recent will, dated 3 months ago. "That's impossible," Margaret interrupted. "Richard never mentioned changing his will." "Nevertheless, Mrs. Harrison, he did. The new will significantly alters the distribution of assets." The tension in the room was palpable. I could see people exchanging glances, phones being discreetly pulled out to record what was happening. Mr. Chen continued. "The primary beneficiary of Mr. Harrison's estate is his daughter, Nicole Harrison." The explosion of voices was immediate. Margaret actually staggered backward, caught by James. Catherine's face went bright red. "That's ridiculous," James shouted. "She hasn't spoken to Dad in years. She's been nothing but a disappointment," Catherine added. "This has to be some kind of mistake." Margaret had found her voice again. "I want to contest this immediately. Richard wasn't in his right mind. That girl probably manipulated him somehow." Mr. Chen raised his hand for silence. "I understand this is surprising news. However, I can assure you that Mr. Harrison was completely competent when he made these changes. I have medical documentation confirming his mental capacity, and the will was witnessed by 3 independent parties." "What exactly did he leave her?" Margaret's voice was deadly quiet now. "The majority of the estate, including the family home, the business, and the investment properties. However, Mr. Harrison also made provisions for you and your children. You'll receive $2 million, Mrs. Harrison, and James and Catherine will each receive $1 million. The math was clearly not working out the way Margaret had expected. She'd gone from inheriting everything to receiving what amounted to a severance package. $2 million? She sputtered. "After 20 years of marriage? After building that business together?" "Mom, calm down," James said, but his face was ashen. "We need to think about this logically." "Think about what?" Catherine was crying now. "She gets everything and we get scraps? This is insane." All eyes turned to me. I'd been silent throughout the entire exchange, trying to make sense of how my life had just completely changed. These people who had spent years making me feel small and unwanted were now looking at me with a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been fear. "Nick," Margaret said, and for the first time in years her voice wasn't condescending. "You have to understand. This doesn't make sense. Your father built that business for his family, for all of us. I never asked for any of this," I said quietly. "Then give it back," Catherine snapped. "If you don't want it, sign it over to us. We're the ones who actually cared about Dad." The accusation stung because part of me wondered if it was true. Had I given up on Dad too easily? Should I have tried harder to maintain our relationship despite Margaret's interference? But then I remembered the letter, his words about taking responsibility for our distance. And I thought about all the times I'd reached out only to be rebuffed or ignored. "I need time to think about all of this," I said. "Time to think?" James was incredulous. "Nick, you're talking about a $50 million business empire. You can't just think about it like it's deciding what to have for lunch." Mr. Chen stepped forward. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion at a more appropriate time. This is still a funeral reception, after all." But the damage was done. Word was spreading through the crowd like wildfire. I could hear the whispers starting again, but this time they had a very different tone. "Did you hear? The artist's daughter inherited everything. Poor Margaret after all these years. I never would have expected Richard to do something like this." Margaret grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "We need to talk privately. This affects all of us." "Mrs. Harrison?" Mr. Chen interrupted. I would advise against any private discussions regarding the will without legal representation present. The implication was clear. He was warning me that they might try to pressure me into giving up my inheritance. I think I should go, I said, looking around the room at all the shocked faces staring back at me. Go? Margaret's voice was shrill now. You can't just drop a bomb like this and leave. But I was already walking toward the exit. Mr. Chen fell into step beside me. Ms. Harrison, given the circumstances, I think it would be wise for us to meet tomorrow to discuss your options in detail. There are a lot of decisions to be made. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As we reached the door, I could hear the voices behind us growing louder, more agitated. In the parking lot, Mr. Chen handed me his business card. Are you going to be all right driving home? I looked at my beat-up Honda, thinking about the $8 million house I apparently now owned. I honestly don't know if I'm going to be all right with anything ever again. He smiled kindly. Your father believed you were stronger than you knew. I think the coming weeks will prove him right. As I drove back toward Hartford, my phone started ringing. First James, then Catherine, then numbers I didn't recognize. I turned the phone off and drove in silence, trying to figure out how a day that had started with me being humiliated at my father's funeral had ended with me inheriting more money than I'd ever dreamed of. The rain had stopped, and the October sun was setting behind the Connecticut hills. For the first time in years, I had absolutely no idea what tomorrow would bring. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my tiny studio apartment staring at the legal documents Mr. Chen had given me, trying to make sense of numbers that seemed too large to be real. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I needed to see the business for myself. Harrison Development Company occupied a sleek glass building in Stamford, about 40 minutes from my apartment. I'd driven past it a few times over the years but never stopped. As I pulled into the parking garage, I felt like an imposter. The security guard at the front desk looked at my Honda Civic with barely concealed confusion. I guess I'm here to see whoever's in charge, I told the receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s. Do you have an appointment? I'm Nicole Harrison, Richard Harrison's daughter. Her expression changed immediately. Word had clearly traveled fast. Oh, Ms. Harrison, I'm so sorry for your loss. Mr. Davidson has been expecting you. She led me to an elevator that whisked us up to the executive floor. The offices here were all glass and chrome, with stunning views of Long Island Sound. Everything looked expensive and intimidating. Tom Davidson turned out to be a man in his 50s with graying hair and a firm handshake. He'd been Dad's business partner for over 15 years and currently served as chief operating officer. Nicole, he said warmly, I was hoping you'd come by. Please, sit down. Can I get you some coffee? His office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art on the walls. I perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Mr. Davidson, I have to be honest. I don't know anything about real estate development. He smiled. Call me Tom, and your father knew that. He also knew you were smart enough to learn if you wanted to. Did you know? About the will change, I mean? Tom nodded. Your father discussed it with me. He'd been thinking about it for a while, but something happened a few months ago that made him finally take action. What happened? Tom's expression grew serious. Margaret came to see him at the office. She didn't know I was in the conference room next door. I heard her telling your father that you'd never amount to anything, that you were just waiting for him to die so you could get whatever money he might leave you. The words hit me like a physical blow. Even knowing how Margaret felt about me, hearing it stated so bluntly was painful. Your father was furious, Tom continued. After she left, he came into my office and said he'd made a terrible mistake letting her poison his relationship with you. He said he was going to fix it. He tried to call me around that time, I remembered. But I was busy with work. He tried calling several times, actually. When you didn't call back, he decided to speak through his actions instead. Tom pulled out a thick folder. Let me show you what you've inherited. For the next 2 hours, he walked me through the company's portfolio. Harrison Development owned office buildings, shopping centers, residential complexes, and undeveloped land throughout Connecticut and New York. The company had 42 employees and contracts for projects worth over $100 million. The good news, Tom said, is that we have an excellent management team. Your father built this company to run smoothly whether he was here or not. The day-to-day operations don't require your involvement unless you want to be involved. And if I wanted to sell? We've had offers. 3 major development companies have expressed interest in buying us out. The lowest offer was $65 million. I nearly choked on my coffee. $65 million? Your father turned them all down because he hoped one of his children would want to continue the business. James showed some interest a few years ago, but Tom paused diplomatically. But what? Let's just say James has expensive tastes and limited patience for the details that make a business successful. We were interrupted by Tom's assistant announcing that James and Catherine were in the lobby, demanding to see whoever was in charge. Do you want to see them? Tom asked. I thought about it. Running away yesterday had felt good in the moment, but it had also felt cowardly. Send them up. James stormed into the office like he owned the place, with Catherine right behind him. Both looked like they hadn't slept any better than I had. What are you doing here? James demanded. Learning about the business I apparently inherited. This is ridiculous, Nick. You know nothing about real estate. You'll run it into the ground within a year. Tom stood up. Actually, James, your sister is asking very intelligent questions. She's already grasped more about our operations in 2 hours than you did in the 6 months you worked here. James's face flushed red. I remembered that stint. Dad had given him a job after college, but he'd spent most of his time taking long lunches and leaving early for golf games. Look, Catherine said, sitting down across from me. We need to work something out. This business supports dozens of families. Mom's been involved in the charitable foundation. There are people depending on this company. I'm not planning to fire anyone, I said. But you might sell, James accused. And then what happens to all of us? All of you are getting significant inheritances. Most people would be grateful. Grateful? Catherine laughed bitterly. Nick, Mom gave up her career to support Dad. She's been the hostess for every business dinner, every charity event. She's as much a part of this company's success as anyone. There was some truth to that, I had to admit. Margaret had been the perfect corporate wife, beautiful and charming and socially connected. And James has been training to take over the business, Catherine continued. He has an MBA from Wharton. He also nearly lost us the Riverside project by showing up drunk to a client meeting, Tom said quietly. The room went silent. James looked like he wanted to punch someone. That was one mistake, he said through gritted teeth. It was the last in a series of mistakes. Tom replied, Your father made the decision to change his will after that incident. I was starting to understand. Dad hadn't just been responding to Margaret's cruel words about me. He'd been watching his son prove he wasn't ready for the responsibility of running a major company. So what do you want from me? I asked my half-siblings. Partnership, Catherine said quickly. Keep the business, but bring us in as equal partners. We can all work together. James nodded eagerly. I could be CEO, you could be, I don't know, something creative. Marketing, maybe? The condescension was automatic, so ingrained they probably didn't even realize they were doing it. Even now, when I held all the cards, they still saw me as the little sister who needed their guidance. I need time to think about all my options, I said. Time? James stood up, agitated. Nick, you're talking about our lives here, our futures. And you've all made it very clear over the years how you felt about mine. That stopped them cold. Catherine looked genuinely surprised, as if she'd never considered that their treatment of me might have consequences. We were never cruel to you, she said. You were never kind to me either. Tom was watching this exchange with interest. After James and Catherine left, Catherine crying, James threatening legal action, he poured himself another cup of coffee. Your father worried about this, he said. He knew they'd see you as an obstacle rather than a sister. What would you do if you were me? Tom considered the question carefully. Your father built this company because he loved creating things, solving problems, seeing empty lots become places where people could live and work and build their lives. If you sell to one of the big corporations, that vision dies. They'll strip out everything that makes Harrison Development special and turn it into just another profit center. But I don't know how to run a company. Neither did your father when he started. But he had good instincts and he surrounded himself with people who knew what they were doing. Tom smiled. The same offer stands for you. I spent the rest of the day touring the company's current projects. We visited a residential development in Westport where families were moving into beautifully designed townhomes. We saw the renovation of a historic building in New Haven that was being converted into affordable housing for young professionals. We stopped by the company's newest project, a mixed-use development that would include retail space, offices, and apartments, all designed with environmental sustainability in mind. At each site, I met employees who had worked for Dad for years. They all expressed condolences, but I could also see the worry in their eyes. They were wondering if the new owner would keep them on, if their projects would continue, if their livelihoods were secure. By the time Tom dropped me back at my car, I had a much clearer picture of what I'd inherited. This wasn't just money. It was responsibility for dozens of people's careers, for projects that would shape communities for decades to come. My phone had been buzzing all day with calls from James, Catherine, and Margaret. I'd ignored them all, but as I drove home, I knew I couldn't avoid them forever. That evening, Margaret showed up at my apartment. I almost didn't let her in, but curiosity won out. She looked different without her perfect makeup and designer clothes. Older, more vulnerable. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. We need to talk, she said. My apartment was embarrassing with her there. The studio was maybe 400 square feet, with a Murphy bed, a tiny kitchen, and windows that looked out at the parking lot. Margaret perched carefully on my second-hand couch as if she was afraid it might be dirty. You can't keep the business, she said without preamble. Why not? Because you'll destroy it. Because James has worked his whole life preparing to take it over. Because your father built it for his family, and we're his family too. He left it to me, Margaret. That was his choice. She was quiet for a long moment, looking around my shabby apartment. What do you want, Nicole? Really? You've never cared about money or status. You chose to live like this even when your father offered to help you. That was true. Dad had offered to pay for a better apartment, to help me start my own design business, to give me opportunities I'd turned down because I'd wanted to make it on my own. I want to understand why he chose me, I said honestly. Margaret's carefully controlled expression cracked slightly. Because you're just like him, stubborn, idealistic, convinced you know better than everyone else. Is that why you hated me? The question hung in the air between us. Margaret looked genuinely shocked that I'd asked it so directly. I never hated you, she said quietly. I was afraid of you. Afraid of me? You were his first child, his daughter with his first wife, the woman he loved before he loved me. Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. Every time he looked at you, I could see him remembering her. And you were so much like her, creative, independent, unimpressed by all the things that impressed everyone else. I stared at her. I'd never heard Margaret mention my mother before. I thought if I could make you seem disappointing, make your choices seem wrong, then maybe he'd stop seeing her when he looked at you. The confession hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. Instead, you drove us apart. I know, she whispered. And I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than you'll ever know. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, I could hear traffic and the sounds of people coming home from work, living their normal lives while mine had been turned completely upside down. The business means everything to James, Margaret said finally. It's all he's ever wanted. Then maybe he should have worked harder to prove he deserved it. Margaret flinched. He's made mistakes, but he's still young. He can learn. Maybe. But Dad chose to teach me instead. When Margaret left an hour later, I sat alone in my apartment, thinking about responsibility and forgiveness and the weight of expectations I'd never asked for. Tomorrow, I would have to start making decisions that would affect not just my life, but the lives of everyone connected to Harrison Development Company. Tonight, I was still just Nick Harrison, struggling artist, living in a studio apartment, and wondering how everything had changed so fast. 3 days after Margaret's visit, I was in Mr. Chen's office signing papers that made my inheritance official when his secretary brought in a FedEx envelope marked personal and confidential for me. That's odd, Mr. Chen said, looking at the return address. It's from your father's personal banker. Inside was a letter from David Hoffman at Connecticut Trust, along with a small brass key and another sealed envelope marked for Nicole's eyes only in Dad's handwriting. The letter from Mr. Hoffman was brief. Ms. Harrison, your father asked me to send this to you 1 week after his will was read. He said you would understand what to do with the key. Please call me when you're ready to discuss the contents of Safe Deposit Box 1247. My hands were shaking as I opened Dad's second letter. Nick, if you're reading this, then you've decided to learn more about your inheritance rather than simply selling it off. I'm proud of you for that. The key opens a safe deposit box that contains documents I think you should see before you make any final decisions about the company or your family. Some of what you'll find will be difficult to read, but I believe you deserve to know the truth. The box is at Connecticut Trust in Greenwich. Mr. Hoffman will assist you. Whatever you decide to do with this information is up to you. I trust your judgment. Love, Dad. Mr. Chen drove me to the bank himself. Mr. Hoffman, a thin man with worried eyes, led us down to the vault level and used his key along with mine to open the safe deposit box. Inside were financial documents, correspondence, and several manila folders marked with dates going back 20 years. The first folder I opened was labeled Margaret, Personal. What I found inside made my stomach drop. Bank statements showing payments to a private investigator, reports detailing surveillance of my movements during college and after graduation, photos of me at coffee shops, walking to classes, even on dates. He was having me followed? I whispered. Mr. Hoffman shook his head. Those aren't from your father, Ms. Harrison. Look at who hired the investigator. I looked more closely at the paperwork. The payments were coming from an account belonging to Margaret Harrison. Mr. Chen leaned over my shoulder. Your stepmother was having you investigated. The reports were thorough and invasive. They detailed my grades, my boyfriends, my part-time jobs, even my therapy sessions after Mom died. But what disturbed me most were the handwritten notes in the margins, clearly in Margaret's writing. Still seeing that inappropriate boy, and spending money frivolously, And no signs of drug use, but should continue monitoring. Why would she do this? I asked. Mr. Hoffman pulled out another folder. I think this will explain it. This folder contained correspondence between Margaret and a lawyer I'd never heard of. The letters discussed strategies for limiting Nicole's influence on Richard and protecting the legitimate family's interests. But the most damning document was a copy of a letter Margaret had sent to Dad 3 years ago, right around the time our relationship had completely deteriorated. Richard, it began, I'm writing this because I love you and I'm worried about Nicole's influence on you. The investigators' reports confirm what I've suspected. She's living a reckless lifestyle, associating with questionable people, and clearly hoping you'll bail her out financially when her art career inevitably fails. I know you feel guilty about her mother's death, but enabling Nicole's poor choices isn't helping anyone. Our children have worked hard to build relationships with you and contribute to the family business. Don't let misplaced sentiment about your first marriage cloud your judgment about who really deserves your legacy. I read the letter 3 times, each pass making me angrier. The questionable people she referenced were my art school friends. The reckless lifestyle was me working 2 part-time jobs to pay rent while trying to build a freelance career. And the misplaced sentiment was Dad's love for my mother, who had died of cancer when I was 12. There's more, Mr. Hoffman said gently, handing me another folder. This one contained Dad's responses to Margaret's accusations, handwritten notes that were never sent, drafts of letters defending me, research he'd done to fact-check Margaret's claims. I could see his internal struggle playing out across the pages, his love for me warring with Margaret's constant manipulation. One note, dated just 6 months ago, brought tears to my eyes. Nicole is not her mother, but she has her mother's integrity. Sarah would be ashamed of me for letting anyone convince me that our daughter was anything less than extraordinary. The final folder was the most shocking. It contained financial records showing that James had been embezzling money from the company for over 2 years. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. The records showed fake invoices, inflated expense reports, and unauthorized transfers totaling over $300,000. Dad knew about this? I asked. Mr. Hoffman nodded. He hired a forensic accountant 6 months ago when he started noticing irregularities. That's when he decided to change his will. Does James know that Dad found out? We don't believe so. Your father was still deciding how to handle it when he passed away. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed. My step-family hadn't just been cold and dismissive. They'd been actively working to destroy my relationship with Dad while stealing from his company. What did Dad want me to do with this information? Mr. Chen spoke up. The letter says it's your choice. But I think he wanted you to understand that his decision to change the will wasn't impulsive. It was based on 20 years of seeing who his family really was. We made copies of everything and returned the originals to the safe deposit box. As we drove back to Mr. Chen's office, I felt like I was seeing my entire childhood through a different lens. All those times Margaret had seemed to know exactly what to say, to make Dad doubt me. All those coincidental discoveries of my minor mistakes or poor choices. She'd been building a file against me for years. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at the copies of the documents, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, to throw their crimes and manipulations back in their faces. But another part of me wondered if Dad would have wanted me to handle this quietly, to take the high road. My phone rang. It was Tom from the office. Nick, I'm sorry to bother you at home, but we have a problem. James came by the office today demanding access to the financial records. When I refused, he threatened to go to the board of directors and claim you're incompetent to run the company. Can he do that? Legally? No. The company is yours now. But he could make things difficult, especially if he convinces some of our business partners that there's instability in the leadership. I made a decision. Tom, can you set up a meeting for tomorrow morning? I want James, Catherine, and Margaret there. It's time we had an honest conversation. Are you sure? They're pretty angry right now. I'm sure. And Tom, can you bring the financial records for the past 3 years? All of them. The next morning, I arrived at the Harrison Development offices early. I'd barely slept, but I felt clearer than I had since Dad's funeral. Tom met me in the conference room with boxes of financial documents and a look of concern. You don't have to do this alone, he said. We can bring in the company's legal team. No, this is family business, but I appreciate you being here. Margaret, James, and Catherine arrived together, all dressed for battle. Margaret wore her most intimidating business suit, and James looked like he was ready to take over the boardroom. Catherine seemed nervous, which made me think she might not know about her brother's embezzlement. Well, Margaret said, taking a seat at the head of the conference table like she still owned the place. You called this meeting. What do you want? I placed a folder in front of each of them. I want to show you what Dad left me in addition to the business. James opened his folder first. His face went white as he saw the financial records documenting his theft. This is, I can explain, $300,000 over 2 years, I said calmly. Fake invoices, padded expense reports, unauthorized transfers to your personal accounts. Catherine gasped, looking at her brother with shock. James, what is this? It's not what it looks like, he said, but his voice was shaking. Margaret had opened her folder and was staring at the surveillance reports. Where did you get these? Dad's safe deposit box, along with all your correspondence with lawyers about protecting the legitimate family's interests. 20 years of you systematically poisoning his relationship with me. The room was dead silent. Tom was staring at Margaret with disgust. You had your own stepdaughter followed by private investigators, he said. What kind of person does that? The kind who was protecting her family, Margaret snapped. But she'd lost her usual confidence. Protecting your family by destroying mine? I stood up, feeling years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. You made me feel like I was crazy for thinking you hated me. You made me doubt my own memories, my own experiences. You turned my father against me with lies and manipulation. I never lied, Margaret said defensively. You told him I was living a reckless lifestyle. You said I was associating with questionable people and waiting for him to die so I could inherit his money. All lies. Catherine was crying now. Mom, how could you do this? Because she would have taken everything, Margaret exploded. She was his precious first daughter, the child of his perfect first wife. No matter what we did, what we accomplished, he always loved her more. The raw honesty of it was breathtaking. After 20 years of pretending to care about me, Margaret had finally admitted the truth. So you decided to make sure he stopped loving me. I decided to make sure he saw you clearly. No, I said quietly. You decided to make sure he saw me through your eyes, through your jealousy and insecurity and fear. James was slumped in his chair, the fight gone out of him. What are you going to do? About the money? I looked at him, this half-brother who had never shown me anything but disdain, who had stolen from our father's company while positioning himself as the responsible heir. What would you do, James? If someone had stolen $300,000 from your company? It's not stealing. I always planned to pay it back. With what? Your salary that Dad was paying you for work you barely did? Tom cleared his throat. Actually, the forensic accountant found evidence that James was planning to take more. There are emails discussing a transfer of $2 million that was scheduled for next month. Catherine stared at her brother in horror. $2 million? I was going to start my own company, James said desperately. I was going to compete with Dad, show him I could succeed on my own, by stealing his money and using his business contacts, I said. Margaret was frantically looking through the documents. Richard knew about all of this? He knew about everything. The surveillance, the manipulation, the theft. That's why he changed his will. The three of them sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that their years of plotting and scheming hadn't gone unnoticed. So what happens now? Catherine asked quietly. I'd been thinking about that question all night. The old me, the one who'd been intimidated and hurt by their rejection, might have tried to find some compromise, some way to keep the family peace. But I wasn't that person anymore. The documents in Dad's safe deposit box hadn't just revealed their crimes. They'd revealed his faith in me, his belief that I was strong enough to handle the truth and wise enough to know what to do with it. Now, I said, we're going to have a conversation about consequences. I let the silence stretch for a full minute before continuing. James, you're going to resign from the board of directors effective immediately. You're also going to sign a confession detailing your embezzlement and agree to pay back every penny you stole with interest. And if I refuse, then I'll have you arrested for corporate theft. $300,000 is a felony. You'll go to prison. James's face crumpled. Nick, please, I made mistakes, but I'm still your brother. Ha, my brother? The word came out harsher than I intended. When have you ever treated me like a sister? When have any of you treated me like family? Catherine spoke up, her voice small. We were kids when Dad married Mom. We didn't know how to... You weren't kids when you laughed at me at Dad's funeral, I interrupted. You weren't kids when you told me I was a disappointment who should just leave. Margaret straightened in her chair, trying to regain some authority. Nicole, I know you're angry, but destroying this family won't bring your father back. I'm not destroying anything, Margaret. I'm just finally seeing it clearly. Tom handed me another folder. There's something else you should know. The forensic accountant found evidence that Mrs. Harrison was aware of James's financial irregularities. Margaret went pale. That's not true. There are emails between you and James discussing borrowing money from the company. You advised him on which accounts would be less likely to be noticed. I stared at Margaret in disbelief. You knew he was stealing and you helped him? It wasn't stealing. Margaret's composed facade was completely gone now. It was his inheritance. Richard was never going to give James the recognition he deserved, so we took what should have been his anyway. $300,000 was his inheritance? It would have been if Richard hadn't lost his mind and left everything to you. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Margaret had just confessed to conspiracy to commit embezzlement. Get out, I said quietly. What? Get out of this building, all of you. You're no longer welcome here. You can't do this, James said, panic creeping into his voice. I know this business. I know the clients, the projects. Tom knows the business better than you ever did. The employees know it better than you ever did. You were dead weight, James. And Dad finally realized it. I turned to Margaret. You have 1 year to find another place to live, as per Dad's will. After that, if you're still in the Greenwich house, I'll have you evicted. Nicole, Catherine said desperately, please, I didn't know about any of this. I never stole anything, never hired investigators. Can't we work something out? I looked at her, this half-sister who had never been actively cruel but had never been kind either, who had stood by while her mother and brother attacked me but had never spoken up in my defense. Catherine, you'll get your $1 million inheritance as Dad specified. That's more than generous considering you've contributed nothing to this company. But the family… What family? I stood up, gathering the folders. You made it very clear at the funeral that I'm not part of your family. Well, congratulations. Now you're not part of mine either. Margaret made one last desperate play. You can't run this company alone. You have no experience, no training. You'll destroy everything Richard built. Maybe I will, I said. But at least I won't steal from it while I'm trying. Security escorted them out of the building. I watched from my new office window as they argued in the parking lot, probably trying to figure out their next move. Part of me felt sorry for Catherine, who seemed genuinely shocked by her family's crimes. But I couldn't separate the innocent from the guilty anymore. They were a package deal, and I was done trying to earn their acceptance. Tom knocked on my office door. How are you holding up? I feel like I'm going to throw up. He smiled sadly. Your father said the same thing after his first big confrontation with a difficult client. He told me later that standing up for yourself never feels good in the moment, but it gets easier. Did I do the right thing? You did the only thing you could do. A company built on theft and lies isn't sustainable. Over the next few days, I threw myself into learning the business. Tom introduced me to key employees, walked me through ongoing projects, and explained the financial systems James had been exploiting. I discovered that several employees had suspected something was wrong, but hadn't known how to report it without risking their jobs. James made it clear that questioning his decisions was questioning the Harrison family. One of the project managers told me. People were afraid to speak up. The more I learned, the angrier I became, not just at the theft, but at the culture of fear and intimidation that had allowed it to flourish. Dad had built this company on principles of integrity and excellence, and his own son had been slowly poisoning it from within. I called an all-hands meeting for Friday afternoon. The entire staff gathered in the main conference room, about 40 people whose livelihoods depended on the decisions I was making. I know there's been a lot of uncertainty this week, I began, looking out at their concerned faces. I want to be completely transparent with you about what's happening and where we're going from here. I explained the situation without going into all the sordid family details. I told them about the embezzlement, about James's removal from the company, about my commitment to running Harrison Development with the same integrity Dad had insisted on. I know many of you are wondering whether I'm qualified to run this company, I said. The honest answer is that I'm not. Yet. But I'm committed to learning, and I'm committed to preserving what my father built here. An older woman in the back raised her hand. What about the projects we're working on? Will there be any changes? No changes to current projects. We honor our commitments. We finish what we start. We do excellent work. Those principles don't change just because the ownership has. A young man near the front asked, "What about James? Will he be back?" No, James Harrison will have no further involvement with this company. I could see relief on several faces. Whatever loyalty they might have felt toward James personally, they clearly understood that his behavior had put their jobs at risk. After the meeting, Tom introduced me to our senior project manager, a woman named Lisa Chen who had been with the company for 8 years. I have to ask, Lisa said once we were alone, are you planning to sell the company? I don't know yet. Would you recommend that I do? She considered the question carefully. Your father built something special here. We're not just a development company. We're part of the communities we build in. We employ local contractors. We design projects that fit the neighborhoods. We maintain relationships with our tenants for years after construction is complete. And if I sold to one of the big corporations, they'd turn us into a profit center. They'd cut staff, speed up timelines, reduce quality. Within 5 years, there wouldn't be anything left of what your father created. That evening, I drove to the Greenwich house for the first time since the funeral. I still had a key, though I'd never felt welcome enough to use it. The house was enormous. 8 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a 3-car garage, and grounds that required a full-time landscaping service. Margaret's car was in the driveway, but I didn't go inside. Instead, I walked around to the backyard where Dad used to have his workshop. It was a small building he'd built himself, filled with woodworking tools and half-finished projects. I found what I was looking for on his workbench, a photo album I'd given him years ago, filled with pictures from my childhood. Pictures of us building sandcastles, me sitting on his shoulders at a baseball game, the two of us covered in flour after attempting to bake cookies. There was also a letter addressed to me, dated just 2 weeks before his death. "My dear Nick," it read, "I'm sitting in my workshop looking at pictures of you as a little girl, remembering how proud I was to be your father. I'm writing this because I may not have the courage to say it in person. I failed you. I let other people convince me that providing for you financially was the same as being your father. I let pride and stubbornness keep me from picking up the phone, from showing up at your apartment, from fighting for our relationship. I'm hoping that what I've left you in my will give you the resources to build the life you want. But more than that, I'm hoping it will show you how much faith I have in the woman you've become. Don't let anyone tell you that you're not ready for this responsibility. You're more ready than you know. Love always, Dad." I sat in his workshop until it was dark, crying for the relationship we'd lost and the father I was finally getting to know through his letters. When I got home, there was a message on my answering machine from Mr. Chen. 2 of the corporations that had made offers to buy Harrison Development had increased their bids significantly. One was now offering $85 million. $85 million. More money than I could spend in several lifetimes. Enough to ensure I'd never have to worry about rent or groceries or car repairs ever again. But as I sat in my tiny apartment looking at the photos from Dad's workshop, I realized that wasn't what he'd wanted for me. He hadn't left me a fortune so I could retreat from the world. He'd left me a responsibility so I could engage with it. The next morning, I called Mr. Chen and told him to decline all offers to purchase the company. Harrison Development wasn't for sale. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office, Dad's old office, which I'd redecorated with some of my own artwork and photos from his workshop, reviewing the quarterly reports when Tom knocked on the door. "The New Haven project is ahead of schedule and under budget," he announced with a grin. "And the Westport development just won the State Award for Sustainable Design." I smiled, feeling a pride I never could have imagined. Dad would have loved that award. He would have been proud of you, too. It hadn't been easy. The first few months were overwhelming, filled with 18-hour days, emergency meetings, and decisions that affected millions of dollars and dozens of jobs. I'd made mistakes, some small, some expensive, but I'd learned from each one. I'd also made changes. I'd instituted regular employee meetings where anyone could voice concerns without fear of retribution. I'd brought in an independent auditor to review all financial processes and ensure James's embezzlement could never happen again. I'd started a profit-sharing program that gave every employee a stake in the company's success. Most importantly, I'd stayed true to Dad's vision while adding my own perspective. We were still building high-quality developments, but now we were also incorporating affordable housing into every project, partnering with local artists to create public spaces, and prioritizing environmental sustainability in ways that went beyond what was legally required. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Lisa Chen calling from the Bridgeport site. "Nick, you need to see this," she said, excitement clear in her voice. "The community center is opening today, and there's something happening you should witness." I drove to Bridgeport, where our latest mixed-use development included a community center with after-school programs, job training services, and affordable meeting spaces for local organizations. As I pulled up, I could see dozens of families gathered for the opening ceremony. Lisa met me at the entrance. "Look at the artwork," she said, pointing to the walls. The murals were beautiful, vibrant, hopeful scenes of community life painted by local teenagers who'd participated in our summer art program. In the corner of one mural, I spotted a small signature that made my heart skip, "Inspired by N. Harrison." "The kids asked who designed the community center," Lisa explained. "When I told them it was you, they wanted to dedicate the artwork to you." I walked through the center, watching children play in the new playground, teenagers working on computers in the media lab, elderly residents taking an exercise class in the multi-purpose room. This was what Dad had meant about creating places where people could build their lives. On the drive back to Stamford, my phone rang. I'd changed my number after receiving too many hostile calls from Margaret and James, but this was a number I recognized. "Hello, Catherine?" "Nick." My half-sister's voice was tentative. "I was wondering if we could talk. We met at a coffee shop in Hartford. Neutral territory for both of us." Catherine looked different, less polished, more real somehow. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual designer outfits. "I got a job," she said after we'd ordered, "marketing coordinator for a nonprofit in Boston. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work." "That's good. How are you doing financially?" I knew her $1 million inheritance would be more than enough to start over, but I was curious about her state of mind. "I'm okay. I bought a small condo, nothing fancy. I'm learning to live within my means for the first time in my life." She paused, stirring her coffee nervously. I wanted to apologize. For what specifically? For everything. For not standing up to Mom when she was manipulating Dad against you. For not seeing what James was doing. For treating you like you didn't matter. I studied her face, looking for signs of insincerity, but she seemed genuinely remorseful. "I was jealous of you," she continued. "Not because of the inheritance, but because Dad talked about you differently. Even when he was frustrated with your choices, there was love in his voice. With James and me, it always felt like we were projects he was trying to perfect. That insight surprised me. I'd always thought Catherine and James were the favored children, the ones who'd gotten Dad's attention and approval." "He loved you too," I said. "Maybe, but not unconditionally. Not the way he loved you." She wiped her eyes with a napkin. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what we took from you, and I'm sorry." We talked for another hour about our childhood, about the family dynamics that had pitted us against each other, about the ways Margaret's insecurity had poisoned all our relationships. It was the most honest conversation Catherine and I had ever had. As we were leaving, she asked, "Are you happy? Running the company, I mean?" I thought about it. I'm challenged. I'm scared most of the time. But yes, I think I'm happy. I'm building something that matters. Dad would be proud. I hope so. A week later, I got a call from Mr. Chen that Margaret and James were requesting a meeting. They wanted to discuss resolving our differences amicably. "What do you think they want?" I asked Tom. "Money, probably. Or they're planning to contest the will again." I agreed to meet them at Mr. Chen's office, with full legal representation present. Margaret and James arrived with their own lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman who looked like she'd been briefed for battle. "Nicole," Margaret began, "we've all had time to cool down and think rationally about this situation. Have we? We want to propose a settlement. You keep the company, but we'd like to discuss a more equitable distribution of the liquid assets." Their lawyer slid a document across the table. They were asking for an additional $10 million each, claiming that Dad's will was written under duress and didn't reflect his true intentions. "This is interesting, Mr. Issei," Chen said after reviewing their proposal. "You're claiming that Mr. Harrison was mentally compromised when he changed his will, but you have no medical evidence to support that. In fact, we have extensive documentation proving he was completely competent. We also have evidence of undue influence," Margaret's lawyer replied. "Our client has reason to believe that Ms. Harrison manipulated her father into changing his will." I almost laughed. "What evidence?" "The timing of the will change coincides with increased contact between you and your father." "You mean the phone calls where I barely talked to him for 10 minutes because I was busy working?" Mr. Chen pulled out a folder. "Actually, I have phone records showing that Ms. Harrison initiated contact with her father exactly twice in the 3 months before his death. Both calls lasted less than 15 minutes. Hardly evidence of manipulation." The meeting went downhill from there. Margaret became increasingly desperate, making wild accusations about my ulterior motives and calculated estrangement designed to make Dad feel guilty. James's lawyer threatened legal action that everyone in the room knew would fail. Finally, I'd heard enough. "I have a counter-proposal," I said, standing up. "You get exactly what Dad left you in his will. $2 million for Margaret, $1 million each for James and Catherine. Not a penny more. In exchange, you sign agreements never to contest the will again, never to make public statements about family business, and never to interfere with Harrison Development Company operations." "And if we refuse?" Margaret asked. "Then I release all the evidence of James's embezzlement to the district attorney. I also release the surveillance reports and correspondence showing your systematic campaign to destroy my relationship with Dad. I think the business community would be very interested to know how the Harrison family really operates." Margaret's face went white. "You wouldn't. Try me." They signed the agreements that afternoon. That evening, I drove to Willowbrook Cemetery for the first time since the funeral. Dad's headstone was simple granite with his name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved Father and Builder of Dreams." I sat on the grass beside his grave and told him about the company, about the projects we were working on, about the employees who were thriving under the new policies. I told him about Catherine's apology and Margaret's final defeat. I told him about the community center and the kids who had dedicated their artwork to me. "I think I understand now," I said aloud, not caring if anyone heard me talking to a headstone. "You didn't leave me a fortune. You left me a purpose." The sun was setting behind the Connecticut hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow there would be more challenges, more decisions, more responsibilities. But tonight, sitting beside Dad's grave, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. 3 months later, Harrison Development Company was featured on the cover of Connecticut Business Magazine. The headline read, "The New Generation: How Nicole Harrison is Revolutionizing Community Development." The article detailed our innovative approaches to affordable housing, environmental sustainability, and community engagement. I kept a copy of the magazine in Dad's old workshop, right next to the photo album of my childhood pictures. Sometimes, when the pressure of running a $50 million company became overwhelming, I'd go there to remember why I was doing it. Not for the money, though financial security was nice after years of struggle. Not for revenge against the family members who had dismissed me, though proving them wrong had been satisfying. I was doing it because Dad had seen something in me that I'd never seen in myself. He'd believed I was strong enough to handle the responsibility, wise enough to make good decisions, and compassionate enough to use power in service of others. The little girl who had been laughed at during her father's funeral was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned that sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is the chance to prove yourself worthy of their faith, and I was determined not to let him down.